Well, hello and welcome. We're really excited to have you tune in today to our webinar, Short-Term Rentals, the Challenges and the Solutions. My name's Corinne Aycock and I'll be your host for this event. Now, the short-term rental market, or STR as we like to say for short, has exploded in recent years to a $99 billion industry. You may already be experiencing more citizen complaints, along with the demand for more services. But you got to ask yourself, is your community getting its fair share of revenue for this market? That's why we've brought together two experts who know the ins and the outs of STRs to discuss strategies and insights for effective compliance. It's my pleasure to introduce Penny Curtis, the Code Enforcement Supervisor for the City of Frisco, Texas, which has a booming STR market. Penny tackled STR compliance by including all stakeholders and developed a successful program that we're going to learn more about in just a few minutes. Penny, welcome. It's really great having you with us today. We can't wait to hear your experiences firsthand.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. And we also have Michael Pelfrey, Chief Revenue Officer at Avenue. Michael actively works with government officials across the entire country and helps them navigate through the different challenges of this rapidly evolving market. He's up to date on the challenges and strategies that are being used by small, medium, and large jurisdictions. Welcome, Michael. It is always a pleasure having you at the table.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
And Michael certainly has become our subject matter expert in the industry and at Avenue. You see, Avenue is a leading provider of revenue recovery and administration solutions. We currently serve 3,500 state and local governments and are the experts in government compliance and administration. We've heard your demand for more information and solutions for short-term rental compliance, which is why we're here today. And it's really a very important topic, especially when you consider that STRs may be a critical revenue source that's not being fully collected for your community. Today, we'll be covering the current state of the STR market, the challenges faced by local governments and communities, and why it's hard to solve. We're going to dive into Penny's experiences and how she brought compliance into the city of Frisco, while gaining insights and strategies from Michael's expertise. We'll also talk about the measures needed to develop an effective compliance and administration program, and what needs to be considered to make it right for your community. We'll have a Q&A session at the end, so please use the chat feature along the way to submit your questions as we go along. Now let's get started and turn our attention to exactly what is the current state of the STR market. We all know that the industry has been blowing up lately, but Michael's going to give us some facts and figures to help us really wrap our heads around how huge this thing is. Michael, again, welcome and over to you.
Thanks, Corinne. So I think as we get started, let me just kind of open with, appreciate everyone's time today. I think this is such a vibrant topic for so many of you. And at least from our perspective at Avenue, it's a tough item to address, I think partially because the velocity, and we'll talk about that on the slide here, the velocity of the industry is so high. And I think we're finding that taxpayers are struggling just as much as we are with how to keep up with a rapidly evolving kind of ordinance base and tax environment. So let's start up in the top left here. I think first and foremost, why your communities care about this particular item is there is a fantastic layer of growth here. Over the last decade, you see this number here, but in aggregate over a low to mid 20s aggregate growth year over year. That is significant for us, right? When you've got a 1,500% growth over a decade, clearly short-term rentals are more than a fad. As you shift into kind of the center of your screen here at 24.7% average nightly rate expansion, some of that is tied to inflation. So there's a layer of that is just people are willing to pay more because costs are higher. Some of it is also, I'll say, the individual property owners or business operators are flexing in to revenue that was traditionally sitting in hotel motels, and they're capturing more of that fee base. On the right, let's talk about the platforms just for a quick second. We'll expand on that in a few minutes. But if you had looked at the technology map maybe 7 to 10 years ago, the industry was tracking 3 to 4 websites. So your classic Airbnbs, VRBOs today, and we'll give you a cut of that in a second, but we're tracking well north of 125 unique web portals with dozens springing up across the country every single day. This is becoming a technology challenge that we certainly are here to talk about. And if we shift over then a little bit to what comes with it. So as we start to see more listings, we see more rentals, we see more velocity in the baseline demand, with that comes complaints, it comes impact to your communities. We're going to spend a lot of time on this today. Penny's got a very unique and real-time perspective to that. But I think the reality is most communities, county, certainly, and municipalities struggle with, well, I'll say, the unfocused inputs of complaints. They go to mayors and city council members and police chiefs. And we're certainly looking at how do we bring those together and reduce the load that so many of you struggle with. And then the reality just is it's not slowing down. We continue to see roughly, I'll say, a high to low 30s growth rate in all global markets. And I think the challenge here for many of you is it is competing with your traditional hotel motels, so much so that you're seeing hotel motels advertising on the same websites that your operators do. That tells you that these things are clearly taking business, and it's something we've got to plan and account for.
Yeah, so those numbers are quite staggering, and the industry's really taken off. And you're right, it's not showing signs of slowing down. It's never going to slow down again. And I know there's a lot of STR platforms out there. Michael, I just wanted to share this quick visual on this next slide, and to just quickly talk about like how many STR platforms there are. It's like raining cats and dogs out there with STR platforms.
Yeah, it certainly is, Green. I think what we find interesting, certainly from Avenue's point of view here, is that it's a little bit like squeezing the air in a balloon, right? The business, there's so much business that everybody's looking to participate in the marketing, or how do we attract and essentially capture some of the rental transactions. And so, for Alan Adamer, for those that have met him, he's kind of one of our resident experts in the STR industry. He very specifically has a unique perspective on this rapid expansion. And it's one of the things that I think communities struggle with is how do you keep up? How do you watch all this? And then how do I turn that into policy and enforcement for my community? But we'll spend a lot of time on that today.
All right, well, great. So let's move beyond the big picture and hear about how this growth has affected a local community by turning our attention to Penny in the city of Frisco, where sports and tourism have collided to create a hotbed of STR activity. Penny, when did you start noticing an increase in STRs, and what signs should our audience look for?
Well, our city is a little bit unique. I've been working on this for 5 years. I was given it, said, let's start looking into it. And basically, the reason our city is unique is all of a sudden we have the Dallas Cowboy headquarters here. We have the PGA World headquarters here. We have the Dallas Stars farm team, Texas Rangers farm team. We have quite a bit of sports activities, which we started seeing and getting complaints about loud parties or houses being rented. So we started our research and just really started putting the data together. And that's when it took us a few years to work with our citizens, to work with our mayors, everybody. And we had to bring everybody to the table. And the way we did that is involving everybody and saying, okay, we hear y'all talking about the issues. How do we work it out? So that was part of what we had to do, was just sit down and go, the police departments are having this difficulties. The mayor's getting contacted, the city council's getting contacted, the HOAs are contacting us. We had to come to a conclusion. So what I did is I started a team of everybody and said, as the meetings went on, certain people could say, okay, this doesn't involve me. So the way we started, the answer to that question is we had to bring everybody together first. And we started noticing the problems because of the complaints we were getting.
Great. And so on the slide here, there seems to be quite an effective before and after picture here. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Okay, and on the slides where it says community uproar, it was just everybody, all the complaints, like I just said, were going to different avenues. We had to have those complaints come into one avenue. One person working it could then handle where it actually needed to go. When we started this program, when we started creating the ordinance, we had nothing into place, so we had no clue how many STRs we had. As of today, we have 153 registered, and
And is
bringing
that just the last few months then, or in what time period was that?
what happened is in July of last year, we went live with our ordinance, and then we started doing an educational process and putting the word out there. This is what we had gotten approved by council, and we started getting the registrations. We also started doing that through your company. They helped us out with sending out letters to people, first letters, second letters, and then if we have to, code enforcement gets involved with the third letter. That's happened very little. So we've been able to bring almost 200 of them into compliance of about 600 that we find. And actually that number was about 350 something after you break down the hotels. And then it also, we've noticed the taxes are being paid, so we're actually leveling the playing field for the hotel motels. We were getting a lot of complaints from the hotels that it was unfair. They're suffering. So this really brought the playing field level to where you have to pay the taxes, and they did very well.
Sounds like a good situation for everyone. And Frisco certainly did become a sports mecca with something for everyone. So my husband's going to want to go visit it now. So it's quite
There is
important.
something going on every weekend.
So with growth comes challenges, certainly, for both governments and citizens. So, Penny, can you share some of the pain points faced by both Frisco and its citizens when the STR industry began to take off?
When the STR started to take off, the complaints that we received were the loud parties, numerous people in the homes, trash left on the streets, parking in yards. And so we noticed we were getting more and more of those complaints as certain things got built. So while the Cowboys were building, we didn't have that many. But as the Cowboys built, and now they're having the drafts here or the practices are here, we see it a little bit more often. We've kind of picked up on the complaints a little bit.
Well, so it's clear that the STR boom had a significant impact on Frisco and many other communities across the country, like face these types of challenges.
Yes.
Michael, is there anything you'd like to add on in regards to challenges that governments and communities are facing?
Well, I mean, I think what we see, and we probably talk to 2 or more dozen communities a week at this point. Like, this is a high visibility, high velocity problem, and kind of what you see on the screen here, and I'll touch on a couple points. Screen is, I think everybody's environment is a little different depending upon where you are in your governance. But as Penny said early, if you're sitting with, we'll say, no controls. So if you haven't yet built an ordinance, if you haven't yet structured where to go with your complaints, where to go with your phone calls, if there isn't a formal registration or permitting process, then you're going to be focused on a lot of the community side of this, right? Which, let's touch on a couple. It's going to be complaints from hotel motels. It's going to be folks concerned about affordable housing. It's going to be the trash, the parking, the party homes. That's the volume of cities that are just getting started. For those people that have an ordinance and are getting started with some kind of structure, then it's about adoption. And I think those struggles are different, right? So for a community that is, we'll say, 25 to 40% into their strategy, their challenges are typically in terms of how do we keep up, like Avenue or any company that you work with, to identify all these operators, then put load into enforcement. And so some of the challenges for many of you are going to be, okay, a company that I work with, let's pick Avenue right now, hands me a list of 500 or 2,000 STRs. And what does that mean to enforcement? What does it mean to registration teams? What does it mean to the people that have to operationalize all these taxpayers? Those are some of the challenges that are real. And I think what, we certainly are, I'll say, of like mind on is how do we really partner with you so that we listen to needs of your current residents, needs of your STR operators, needs of your government officials, to try to find a way to bring balance so that folks do have a voice and that we can help you move forward. This is hard, right? I think the one thing I'd put, if
It is.
I have a slide for you, is this is not an easy thing to fix, but it can be improved.
Right. And Michael, I'd like to add on that. The challenges that we really had were in Texas. I don't know about your other states, but in Texas, our lawmakers, we were very, we were very limited as to what we could do, and what we could have in an ordinance. So that was a huge challenge for us. And when I started from a piece of paper, and I worked with our city attorney, who was marvelous. But expressing that to our city council, we had to make them understand you may only have 100 that we can find, but you're still taking away from a personnel, and you're having to have a full-time person to scrub, to write the ordinance, to do the compliance end of it. And I had to show our council the cost of an employee versus the cost of maybe having assistance from a company, who would do this and save us time. And that's where a lot of our challenges were. So the challenge for me is really was having the attorney help us with the laws, help us break it down to where we're at to best suit our citizens. Because remember, it wasn't just the council or city workers complaining. These are your homeowners, and these homeowners and residents have a pride in their community, and it terrifies them that something may happen that is unheard of from a party that could happen and bring their neighborhood down. And the way we did that on those challenges were we really involved them. And you only had maybe 10 or 15 of those people, but it helped make them understand what we could do by law. So those were some of the challenges we hit.
Those are very good points, Penny. And there's probably also a technology factor as well, right? So not only could you have like staffing that's used to try and like keep up with this, but then it's like you have the in-house technology to go ahead and scrape all the STR platforms.
That's correct. There's no possible way. I don't believe there was. That's what I told my council. It would have taken a person to do that. I think I figured it up, and it was going to be just basically you would have to do it 1 week and then go do enforcement, because just finding them and then actually having to prove that it's an STR, because you just don't want to go knock on somebody's door and say, hey, you're on the computer as a website as an STR, and get it slammed in your face.
So that's a great point, Penny. So how do you go about now with a program in place?
Honestly, Avenue has assisted with that because they do all the data collecting for us. They send us the information. They've done the first letters, the second letters, and on the third letter, we send it out, and we usually get a phone call, or the officer will go out and leave a notice on the door, and they're like, "Oh, we're so sorry," and they'll register. So it's been a good system so far, how we have it set up.
So, and Michael, do you want to talk a little bit about the type of proof that can be provided?
Yeah, it's one of the default, I think, deliverables that we certainly provide through our base services. When you look at, like Penny just described, finding them is significant. Like that's the first step.
Mhm.
You've got to be able to prove that I've got evidence that someone appears to be attempting to rent. Like, but that doesn't create tax liability, right? What creates the liability is the proof of a transaction. So it's looking at the booking calendars, it's looking at reviews, it's doing all the evidence capture. Um, I mean, you could literally spend a working week documenting a single property if it were done manually. One property you could spend a week on. I think the challenge and what we've tried to use with technology is how do we use algorithms and AI and adaptive tech to essentially monitor this massive inventory of web portals where we're literally capturing the events of every transaction to give you a fighting chance, right? I will say and I'll acknowledge because we see a booking calendar doesn't always mean that there was a booking event, but it does give you the indication of activity. And over time, that does give you, the burden of proof to be able to, should you choose to pursue somebody, you've got the evidence captures, you've got the screenshots, you've got all the data collection, and it gives you and your legal team a chance.
That's
And I
great.
think that's what we're finding is important. I mean, Penny, I'm sure you're doing some of that today.
We are. And we've been extremely lucky. We've had a couple of people call and say, "Oh, no, not at all. And we're not doing this." And we're like, "Well, let me go show you this." And we could show them the calendar dates. And they're like, "Oh, well, that was our renter doing that." Okay, not a problem. Talk to Avenue, see if they can take it down, and we'll go from there. 2 days later, I got a permit, submittal registration for it. And people, sometimes we had one that just did not feel like the government should be telling them what to do. Um, and the way I express that to them is, it's not the government telling you what to do. But if your house catches on fire or you have an incident at your home, we know who to contact. So our ordinance wasn't so much of a enforcement, you've got to do it and you've got to follow all these rules. Ours was a registration, and we wanted them to register so we knew where they were for police and fire. Once we told this gentleman that, about a week later, he called back and he goes, "Okay, I can see your point." So it wasn't so much government trying to control him, it was just saying, "Hey, you have to do this because it is a business, but yet we want to know for police and fire and for your taxes." So
And it's about life and safety too, right? So
I'm sorry.
it's all about life and safety too.
Right.
Yeah. So without that information, it could be catastrophic for somebody, for a homeowner, or for or a renter.
Yeah.
So it's good to have that information. So the challenges are certainly numerous, making it easy to see that it's important to regulate the STR market. Michael, can you sum up the reasons for us of
Well, I
why
think
it's regulated?
certainly, I think that what should be really clear, and I'm sure everybody that's attending is driven by some motivating factor, but I think if there's one thing we would reinforce is that there is an immediate call to action for everybody here. Um,
Mhm.
and the reason might be a little different for each of you, but let's start at the top. I mean, it's for many of you that drive your government models off of revenue. It starts with the revenue has moved, right? Roughly 40 to 60% of your occupancy taxes for everybody on this phone call today has shifted to short-term rentals. That's massive. So it starts at a revenue play. So your finance team should be at the table. If they're not the one driving it, please include them. Like this has a material impact on the way you run. Number two is just preserve your communities. I'm probably not alone to say I'm a homeowner and I care deeply about my neighbors and I live where I live for a reason. And when, and this is a true story, last summer I live in a college town. Somebody parks in front of my driveway for 4 hours and you can't get out of your house. That's the kind of stuff that is frustrating. So who do you call? Where do you go? And I'd like to know as a citizen that my town cares, that they have a place to handle this in some kind of way that resolves the issue. So those certainly community aspects are important. Ultimately, protecting, I think just critical interests. You're going to have STR associations and groups. If you don't yet have one, get ready, it's coming, right? These organizations are forming all over the country. Number two is safety risks. Penny mentioned this. This is real. That when there are events that certainly can pose critical CERT response teams, make sure that we've got a quick way to deploy those resources and not bog them down with parking and trash violations and low-level complaints. And then the bottom line, I think, is just create a viable and equitable playing field.
Right.
It's what we all want. Penny, I'm sure that's been underneath your strategy too, but that
It
would be my
is. And the other thing is on the what you were talking about, and I may be skipping ahead a little bit, but what we did was to get all of the complaints that were coming in from different areas under one house. So code enforcement regulates the ordinance, but we also have a hotline that they can call, and that way the hotline actually will contact the police department, but they will contact me if it's just trash. They won't contact me if it's a party because they know it needs to go to the police department. So when we had everybody sitting at the table, basically I drew out a diagram, and each point that it would touch are the people that I included. Another way why we regulated them is so that we knew where they were, but because we wanted to be good partners in our community with our HOAs, with the people, with our citizens, because we wanted them to know we heard them and we were doing our best. By including them, they realized how hard we were working. So,
Well, all of those reasons brought up by both of you make it pretty easy to understand the need to regulate. But let's be realistic and look at, and we touched on this a little bit already, but let's look at why it's challenging for governments to tackle the issues. And I'd love to hear from both of you on this, but why STR compliance is a challenge for governments to tackle. And Penny, let's start with you first.
for us, when you look at your chart, the enforcement and STR growth outpaced staff. Absolutely. We have probably 349 in our city, and I have 6 employees for 349,000 people. So it outgrew us quickly. And it's now that the PGA is here, it is definitely outgrowing us. Our lawmakers in Austin, I'm sorry, our lawmakers in Austin also are tying our hands a little bit. So I see one of the questions is the saturation within a square mile. We cannot, in Texas, they're not allowing us to do that. So we can't tell you how many it can be on a block. And that's why it's really important to talk to and work with your attorney. The other thing is the registration requirements. We've had a lot of voluntary compliance. We haven't had any I shouldn't say bad. We haven't had any that we just had issues with and had to write citations. In the last year, it's been really good. Is that what you were asking? I'm sorry.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. Okay, Michael, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
I think what makes my personal, I would say, if I were attempting to summarize what I think I hear from so many of you, it's you're all in different phases, and I think we have a section here that you'll probably see where your city or county is in a second, but let me offer the following. This is hard because you're all in different places, and it is challenging if you're trying to move too far too fast. And let me break that down for you. So if I were sitting with no ordinance, so I have no permitting, I have no fee structure, I have no defined fencing around what a short-term rental is, then it's hard to drive compliance because I need to get started with just build the framework, get my legal definitions in place, get my ordinance through, and that takes time. I mean, for most of you, that's a minimum of 3 months. It can be upwards of a year or more to get ordinance in place. Number two is if the ordinance is there, what gets hard then is, okay, you've got the rules in place. How do we execute this? That's where it gets challenging, I think, for many of you. I mean, Penny's point around staffing, I think, is where a lot of great ideas go to die. We want to fix this. There's clearly emotion around you got to do this better. But the reality is governments don't want to keep adding heads to fix this while the problem keeps growing at 30% a year.
That's correct.
Hard, right? And so we've got to find a way to bring technology to the table that's fast to deploy, that doesn't require heavy demands on IT, that doesn't mean your finance and your enforcement and your registration and permit teams need a 30% increase in headcount every 3 months. Like, that's where this thing gets hard. I would tell you we can work to fix this, but it is about transparency, it's about communication, and it's about having partners that are right there at the table to help you through the tough conversations. And
Yes.
Penny, I think that's what I've appreciated with our relationship is you guys have been exactly that. But I would love to hear your thoughts on how have you taken the tools that are now available? Like, do you feel like you're really improving the model for you, or what is your candid kind of opinion?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I run the program and I have a backup if I'm on vacation. So I go into it, I can look at it and see how many, if we've gotten complaints or anything like that. So the amount of time that I was putting into it between the 5 years of working on it, um, it was astronomical. I mean, it was taking up a lot of my time, and I was having to give other senior personnel my duties so that I could focus on this. And I think once I realized that, I was able to go to my council and say, this isn't working. You need a full-time person, and one's not going to do the trick. So once I did that, it started the ball rolling of, okay, so we're going to do the ordinance. We're going to involve everybody, HOAs, the police department. We're going to educate them.
Yeah.
We're going to come up with a basic ordinance of registration and then education once we do it. And if we sell this to the council, they'll understand it. And I was able to present it to the council that way. And it worked fantastically. There's no way I could have done with the growth that we're having right now. I don't believe there's a way I could have done the data searching by myself or with someone else. I think it would have been a 2 or 3 person job.
Yeah, those hurdles just sound insurmountable, like for a local government on their own without outside help. And I think it's really important that we cover those issues and get an understanding before we explore all the potential solutions there are. So, which everyone wants to know about, that's why we're all here. So let's shift over to the regulatory compliance stages and the compliance life cycle. Penny, so it sounds like when you started your process for creating ordinances, it sounds like you were at stage 1 of this process when you first began. Can you share your experience along with any tips that could save time for governments that are looking to increase their compliance?
When my director said, hey, I want you to look into this, research it, see what's going on. That was 5 years ago. And that's all I did. As I researched it, continued watching lawsuits that did occur, writing my notes and saying, okay, we probably have an issue that's going to happen down the road with all of these sports venues being built. We just had the Country Music Awards here, and that brought in thousands of people. There's no way I could have handled that. So basically what we did is no ordinance, all of our research. We couldn't find them all. And then we moved into, okay, what do we want our ordinance to look like? And how much enforcement did we want to do? Then we went into the ordinance in place and had the data. And that's what I was saying. We had the data so that we went to council and was able to tell it. But from beginning to end, the most important thing I'm going to tell y'all is you have to involve your community because you want to hear their complaints. And you have to involve everybody in the city that has a touch point. Um, Fire department had a touch point, but yet they were able to leave after about 2 months of meetings because we had already addressed their issues. Um, and that's the thing, we all work together. So when I wrote the ordinance and the attorney and I did it, and then we presented it, that's when we got new ideas of, hey, we need to do this, or no, we can't do this because of the law. And now that we have the ordinance in place, the registration in place, the hotlines in place, the dispatchers have been educated. The HOAs understand we can't enforce their rules, but we have something that can enforce rules above and beyond our ordinance, which all of you have, and that's your international property maintenance ordinance. Because no matter if it's an STR or not, they have to mow, they have to keep the fence, they have to paint. So I was telling council, no matter what, we use our property maintenance. If it's an STR or not, we don't care. But on the STR front, we want them to register for police and fire. We're not going after them because they're an STR. We're actually going after them for violations that we already have on the books. And I think once you put it in those terms, it kind of a light bulb went off and went, okay, we can see where this is probably necessary.
So it sounds like by taking by incorporating everyone and all the different stakeholders involved, it took time to do that, but you came up with an end product and that made everybody included
Yes.
and involved and happy with the end.
Right. This is not a fast process. Like I said, the first year was research. The first year was me trying to find the data. That was fun. The second year was, okay, what would an ordinance look like? The third year was putting it together and then getting other people on board, educating them. All this time I was talking to council, each step of my way. And then I started involving where are my touch points? Let's involve all of these groups and set up a meeting. And then the ordinance was written, and then it went to council again and got confirmed. And then they allowed me to have a company, Avenue, to help assist with the location of them. But it's not a fast process. So don't think you're going to throw something at the books and go, okay, we're ready. It's really not. And if that to me is when somebody may actually have a lawsuit happen, and you don't want that.
And that's all the more reason for people to get started now because it's
Right.
an overnight process.
Yes.
So
And if you
go on.
go ahead.
No, go on.
No, if you have a city that has a large tourism, then you definitely want to be methodical and involve everybody writing your ordinance.
Yeah, I'd piggyback on a couple of that. I think what I see as best practice is when this networking effect comes to the table, Penny, where you can lean on these early adopters, and there are many of them, right? So just general statistics of what I see is that there's maybe 25 to 30% of the country that is at stage 3 or 4. Now you can look at that to say, wow, I thought that would be higher. But the reality is there's more of you that are still in drafting and trying to figure out your ordinance than you might think. The places that are in stage 3 or 4 tend to be a lot of coastal areas. So you could literally draw within a 20-mile radius around the country. Anybody who has access to ocean has already dealt with this or is literally midstream trying to fix it. Because they've had to, right? It's had such an impact because of COVID and the work from home thing. People were moving anywhere they wanted, and we're driving a shift in occupancy dollars. Number two is do this with clear and very visible communication about the plan. Sell people on the process, not that this is a one decision fix. And I think that's important so that the right people come to the table understanding that this will take time, this will take commitment, and that we will make small pivots, to make this work for all interested parties. And I think that's what the good communities that we work with, I think that's paramount in the way they run is good communication, selling a vision, and just executing in a way that shows progress. And I think the last thing there is get help, right? I mean, don't do this alone.
No.
That's where mistakes happen, and Penny, like you said, like that can cost you money at the end of the day.
And it can. And I didn't create this all by myself. I had cities that I called and helped or asked, and they would send us information. And then the attorney was the biggest, he would read it and go, oh, we can't do that. But yeah, and honestly, by involving our HOAs, we got to know a lot of people. But they were my complainers, and they were the ones telling us, y'all have to do something.
Yeah.
Now we have their support, and now they go to council saying it's been wonderful because they take care of the problem. Or, we've actually gotten a compliment because we involved them and they actually were able to see, because a lot of people can't see how much you're working on it because you're only doing a telephone call.
Right.
Or, so it really does help to involve them.
And I know it's really important also to make sure there's teeth in the ordinances too. That so that local government has some type of
correct
deal with that on the other side. But let's shift over now to the compliance life cycle. Michael, can you cover the different pieces that make up an effective compliance program for a local government?
Certainly. I think I'd offer this to anybody who's still kind of putting their plan together. I think what this slide is meant to give you is how should a community, whether it's town, city, county, or even a state level program, this is the aspects of, we'll say, following the process through that would be very helpful for you guys to fix or think about the problem differently. Let's start at the top, right? When we're addressing the occupancy tax problem, and that doesn't matter what I am. I can be a hotel, motel, bed and breakfast, short-term rental, long-term rental, whatever. If I'm somehow taxed on that revenue, we've got to make sure that we've got the technology, the processes, and the administration workflows in place to permit, to register, to enforce. All of that tax workflow has to be tied up in some kind of software application. So I'll say everybody starts there. That then shifts us into, once we're running the program, right, then that's going to create problems, and it's similar to like why the IRS exists. We need to start, and very few communities do this yet, but I will tell you openly, there's a lot of underreporting in the short-term rental community because they know you don't have the data, they know you're not looking, and nobody follows up. And so I think a lot of cities and counties kind of take the approach of, well, a dollar is a dollar. But I would tell you that you're missing probably somewhere between 30 and 40% of your tax receipts. And building good governance around your audit program, and then how do you then take me to the next stage, which is how does the community think about the recovery of those identified tax dollars? Like, this is an advanced subset. So I don't offer this to say go run out and do it today, because you've got to have the data collection, the right systems in place, the right partnerships and vendors. But the recovery of those audits can be significant, can be 7 figures for some of you. And it's a large revenue source. The final piece gets us into reporting and analytics. Show me all of my dashboarding. Am I finding everybody? Am I driving good compliance and enforcement? Am I driving the correct and appropriate tax collection? And if not, how do we feed that data back into monitoring so that we can make adjustments to the way we administer? That life cycle, when executed, will make your community run better. It takes a real commitment. It is different than the way you run today, but for me, that's what the best run governments look like when they think about the whole life cycle.
Thank you so much for going over that, because each step is really crucial for governments to not only understand, but address when they are developing their own program so it can be effective. And I'd love to hear from both of you about the benefits of having a compliance and administration program in place.
Penny,
Penny, let's start with you. Oh, I'm sorry.
First off, I'm super happy that we have gotten over the hurdle of creating, um, getting it passed. So that to me was a huge benefit. But I didn't realize how much of a benefit it was really going to be. I was like, okay, we're done. It's not going to be that many. Um, we in the first 6 months we made, and I pulled this up, we made just alone in our permits was $31,500. So the benefits is actually paying for all the work that we did. We collected our hotel taxes right at 7,900 within the first 6 months. So the benefits of it were we actually saw money coming in that we just didn't realize and had that put forth, and we weren't thinking that. The second benefit for me was we had everything was going to one system. One system. So if somebody wanted to call you, they called the 800 number. If somebody wanted to email a complaint, they called and they did that. And as long as you do your education and put it on out, broadcast it throughout the city, they really will use it. That was a benefit because the mayor stopped getting called. The police department dispatch got called on true STR events. The trash people stopped getting called. So it was an actual benefit for less calls because it was funneled into one system, and I will say that system has worked wonderfully for us. And the other benefit and the effective of STR compliance is we know where they're at. So my code officers, they're on those streets all the time anyway. They'll just make sure it looks good and the house has no complaints, and we just kind of can keep an eye on them.
That's awesome. So, and Michael, I'd love to hear from you also, because you've talked to so many people, again, across the country, like all the time, every day. What other benefits are there once you're on the other side?
I think the one thing that just piggybacks on some of what Penny just shared is, for me, this is about scale. That whether I'm tracking 10 STRs or, I mean, we serve some communities that serve 20,000. And so the issue is the same processes will fix both. But if I'm in enforcement, how do I focus on the real high value or field enforcement issues, and how do I use technology and my vendor to handle and automate a lot of the level one or easy enforcement opportunities? If I'm in finance, the scale benefits here are, how do I accelerate tax receipts? How do I add to my tax roll? And how do I make sure that I'm essentially delivering on my budget promises? And then I think from a leadership perspective across all of our communities, this is, I think about transparency. It's about how do we run and serve better. And it's hard to run government without data. I mean, and so this becomes the framework of giving your staff, I think, a fighting chance to keep up, and just have a good partner in the business. I think this is an evolving problem. It's still evolving, right? Ordinances, state law, activist groups, all of those continue to have an input and will create change. And I think it's having the right people and the right strong voices at the table to help you kind of keep up. That would be my 2 cents.
And I would like to say I would not have been, when we did get the ordinance into play, we had to put a moratorium on it for a second, or put it on hold just so that we could build the system, because we had to get with our IT. We had to, build a system. Even with any company you go with, you would have to build it. And that took a little bit of time, but it was so worth the time. I will tell you that um, it has taken being slow and methodical and really doing your research has paid off for us. And the benefit and the time that I don't have to waste by going and doing a lot of the research myself. Um, it's been really a benefit for us.
Isn't there an expression, sometimes you got to go slow so you can move fast?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think we could talk about these topics all day. And so, but we better move into some questions before we run out of time because we're getting close to being on the top of the hour.
Yeah.
So I do have some questions that have come in. So I'm just going to throw them out there. So let's see, this first one. Let's see. So some of them you've already covered. Penny, can you share any specific success stories or outcomes from your compliance efforts in Frisco?
Success stories. Well, I mean, to me, a success story would be when I got the gentleman to get a permit after he didn't believe the government should have regulation on him. And after I explained our ordinance to him and showed him it was more of a permitting for police and fire, I turned him around on that and we got the permit. The other success, I would say, us knowing what communities the STRs are in so that we can actually pinpoint where we have a majority of them versus HOAs that may not, or areas that may not have them. So that was, to me, it was a success to be able to pinpoint where some of the locations were.
All right, thank you. I'm going to throw this one out to both of you. So, Michael, I'm going to ask you first. But what are some effective approaches for local governments to strike a balance between regulating short-term rentals and supporting tourism and hospitality in the industry and for the community?
I think that's a good question, right? That's kind of you'd be in phase 2 or 3 if you're asking that question. And I think the reality is it's communication, right? It's community roundtables and kind of fireside chat kind of discussions where your strong voices in the room can raise concerns, ask questions, and be heard. I think that's an important thing, and our voices can be very different, and they can be very loud on certain topics. And so I'm sure Penny's had to deal with a little of that, but it's how do you accommodate valid opinions to come to the right outcome? And I think that's the beauty of government across this great country is how do we listen to each other? How do we incorporate concerns and feedback and create something better? And I think that's in the spirit of getting to a great outcome. I think that's what this is about. Penny, your thoughts?
I totally agree. We sent out surveys to all the HOAs, asked them to fill them out. What are their concerns? We involved them. We got their voices heard. We involved the police department, got their voices heard. And I think council was extremely happy because we were transparent in what we were doing, but we also said, we need your help. How are we going to get this accomplished? So yeah, having strong voices at the table um, is the best way.
Mm-hmm.
All right, great, thank you. So this next one's for you, Penny.
Uh-huh.
What steps did you take to educate and inform the community about the regulations and compliance requirements for short-term rentals?
We put it in the newspaper. We put it in our Frisco Style magazine that goes out to residents. The Chamber of Commerce helped us get the word out. What else did we do? We broadcasted it on our live TV cable channel for the city of Frisco.
Cool.
We did HOA meetings and broadcasted the information. We just really had general roundtable discussions about it everywhere we went. But the publications really helped get it out there.
All right, awesome, thank you. Michael, this one's a tricky one. What trends or changes do you foresee, if any, in the STR market that could impact the compliance efforts for local governments?
Mm, man, this is where I hate to be a forecaster, but I would say the one thing that's on my radar, and I'm sure for many of you, is the state level or even federal level legislation could have a massive impact. And there are some state rulings, even like just this week, for example, there was one that potentially affects Florida. It's those kind of examples where state legal bodies could shift this and preempt several things and actions and ordinances. Arizona has gone through a lot of this recently. And so I think ultimately that could reshape everything. I mean, because for many of you that have ordinances in place, there could be a ruling that prevents it. And so I think we need to watch those constantly and monitor what those trends are. I think that's a big piece. I also think that there's such a shift away from hotel motels. I am, I'll say, at least curious to see how hotel motels compete. They are not going to let their business walk out the door. And so I think, one of the things that will be interesting is I do think this will rebalance. Like short-term rentals for right now are a better product. Like with respect to hoteliers, I think the reality is short-term rentals are not growing because they're cheaper. They're growing because it's a better experience. Hotels will compete. They will find a way to reattract business. And I think we have to just constantly keep our eyes and ears open for how does that affect our communities? How does it affect our ordinances? And where are the tax dollars going so that we can follow those dollars through and have the right kind of solutions in place to collect them.
So, well, thank you so much. So we are at the top of the hour and it's time to wrap things up. And I just want to take a moment and say thank you to our guest speakers. Penny and Michael, you guys were fabulous and helped shed light on a lot of different areas, and it was tremendously helpful. And thank you to our audience. So it was great having you with us, and we really appreciate your enthusiasm and curiosity that you brought to the conversation. And before you go, don't go yet. We do have a little something for you. So certainly we'll send you a link to the recording of the webinar in case you'd like to share it with any colleagues. But in that email, take a look, because we're going to provide a link where you can order a complimentary STR dashboard and heat map for your jurisdiction. It's just our way of saying thanks for being here today and taking some time out. And it'll give you a chance to see if the STR market is really where you think it is and help you make informed decisions about what directions you're taking. And if anyone has questions, please feel free to reach out to us at any time at succeed@avenueinsights.com. So thank you, everyone, and have a fabulous day.
Thank you.